I think that adults need relevance. Adults are looking for some curriculum, some study that has to do with their life and their situation. So, what I find them interested in reaching for is something relevant, something practical that they can take and use in their everyday life.
I think the most important thing to do is to connect it to worship, to not segregate our education and our learning from our worship, but to integrate that and to talk about those kinds of things together so that we understand that learning is part of our holistic journey with Jesus, not simply something set aside for an hour on a Sunday morning.
Well, I think it is important for an hour-long class or a group to have kind of different movements during that time. I always rely on kind of an icebreaker to set the tone, to get people to feel more comfortable, and then to move into different, looking at scripture, breaking into small groups to have discussions, different activities, maybe a time of writing and reflecting individually. I do think it's important to kind of have different movements throughout the hour.
The very first thing we need to do to encourage adults into learning is to create a safe environment in which they feel welcomed and in which they feel accepted. Safety is the foundation for any kind of learning. Without that, people won't share their stories. They won't talk about their struggles. And it's out of those struggles and stories that meaning comes.
One is logistically, when do the classes meet? And we find that the greatest amount of participation comes when, say, their children are already engaged in other programming. So between the two morning services, our educational hour, and that is for children birth all the way up through adults. And that seems to be timing that works out well for adults. I would also recommend that in your learning environment that as community can be emphasized as much as possible. The idea of gathering into small groups, interrelating with one another, connecting on an emotional and a social level as well as an intellectual level, because people are looking for a place to belong, a place to fit, and people to connect with.
I think the way to find out what people are really looking for is to have conversations with them. There's lots of different things that are happening in lots of different people's lives. And if you pay attention to that, I think that's where those things will kind of bubble up and emerge for what might be an interest. The role of the facilitator is crucial because it's the spirit of that person that's going to foster the spirit of the group. So if that person can be humble and approachable and fun, that's even better. If that person can admit to the group that they don't know everything either, that's going to be really important. And if they can just kind of state the expectation that, there is no such thing as a stupid question.
When I think about the learning environments that adults need to learn best, what they need to connect with what we're trying to do and with what the Scripture and our faith is trying to give us. When I think about all of that, I don't think of one particular style or one particular way of doing things because we're not talking to just one kind of person. And so we need ways to connect to their minds, to their hearts, to their souls. I believe that our learning environment was formed when that lawyer asked Jesus, "What's the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus said, "Love God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." It engages all of us, the whole person, in the variety of ways that we live our lives, the variety of ways that we understand that life. Here's what I have found has worked best for me in adult learning environments. That I take the time to allow adults to ask their questions, not simply hear my information. I try to structure my learning opportunities so that they're not simply full of Jeff talking or Jeff giving information, but they allow time for conversation, for discussion, for questions, because adults end up teaching other adults, not just listening to the teacher. And it's oftentimes in that engagement with each other that new learnings happen and those aha moments occur. That's what I've learned to do, to just back off a little bit and to say, now, let's talk about this together. Let's see what we've learned and how we might use this in our own lives.
I think the best methods of adult learning that here at First Reformed Church have been short 6 to 10 week courses that perk an adult's interest and engage them in interacting with others in the congregation. People walk away feeling like they've connected with some other individuals they didn't know before, they've grown in some spiritual insight, and they walk away with some tools for the coming week.
Different people have different personalities and are kind of drawn to different things. So something that I've kind of discovered the last couple of years that's been really helpful for me and my understanding of what helps me to grow, what helps me connect with God, is this idea that there are spiritual pathways. And lots of people have written books about this, and there's lots of information out there. But there's this idea that just as each of us have different personalities, just as each of us have different ways that we like to relax or unwind, that all of us have different pathways, ways that we naturally connect with God. So some people have kind of a contemplative pathway. And so for those folks, being in a quiet room, no distractions, maybe just listening, praying, that would be the way that their soul is fed and they connect with God. Other people would go nuts if they had to sit in a quiet room, right? So there's different ways that people kind of gravitate towards. And I think it's important to have that understanding to express, there's no one right way for you to walk this journey, and to understand more about who you are and how God has wired you, and to find out what your pathway is so that you can be engaging in that and be fed and sustained and nourished through that.